The night a woman turns her husband into a footnote is often the same night she forgets who wrote the first chapter. Daniel Mercer stood in the kitchen of their Charlotte home with a cast-iron skillet cooling on the stove, 2 plates set on the dining table, and a bottle of non-alcoholic champagne resting in a silver bucket he had borrowed from a neighbor because Lauren liked things to look intentional. The house smelled like rosemary, garlic, and the steak she used to request whenever something important happened. And tonight was important. By noon, every business site in North Carolina seemed to be repeating the same headline. Lauren Mercer's company had signed a $100 million contract with Knox Distribution Group. Daniel had watched the announcement from his office, sitting alone with a paper cup of coffee in his hand, feeling the kind of pride that almost hurt because he remembered the version of Lauren who once cried over late invoices and broken software demos in the guest bedroom. He remembered the pizza boxes on the floor, the whiteboard covered in routes and margins, the nights she fell asleep at her laptop, while he quietly rewrote proposal sections she was too tired to finish. So he cooked, not because one dinner could hold everything they had survived, but because he wanted the first evening after her biggest victory to feel like home. At 8:13, headlights moved across the front window. Daniel straightened the napkins, checked the glasses, and took one breath before Lauren opened the door. She walked in wearing a white suit, sharp and expensive, her hair pinned back, her phone in one hand and her laptop bag over one shoulder. She looked powerful. She looked polished. She looked like the woman on the press release, not the woman who used to sit barefoot in that same kitchen asking if he thought the company would make it through another month. "Congratulations," Daniel said, smiling before he could stop himself. "I am so proud of you." Lauren's eyes moved over the table, the plates, the candles, the champagne, the food waiting under foil. For a moment, he thought he saw something soften in her face. Then she reached into her bag, pulled out a white envelope, and placed it beside his plate like it belonged there with the silverware. "I filed this morning," she said. Daniel looked at the envelope. His mind did not understand it at first because the room had been built for celebration. Steak on the table, champagne sweating in the bucket, her favorite jazz playlist low in the background. The same dining chairs they had bought secondhand after she quit her job to build the company. Divorce papers did not match the setting, and maybe that was why the silence felt so unnatural. "Filed what?" he asked, though he already knew. Lauren sat down across from him, but did not touch the food. "Daniel, please do not make me say it like you do not understand." He slowly pulled out his chair and sat too. The steak between them had already begun to cool. "You filed for divorce on the same day your company signed the biggest contract of your life." She closed her eyes briefly, as if his wording inconvenienced her. "Our lives are moving in different directions." "Our lives. Mine," she corrected, then seemed to realize how sharp it sounded. "I mean, the company is entering a completely different level now. The rooms I am going to be in, the expectations, the pace, the visibility, the kind of partner I need beside me, it is all changing." Daniel stared at her. 5 years ago, the kind of partner she needed had been a man who could pay the mortgage alone while she took no salary. 3 years ago, it had been a man willing to use his savings to cover payroll when her first 2 employees were days away from quitting. 2 years ago, it had been a man who learned enough about logistics software to help make her proposal readable at 2 in the morning. Now, after the contract was signed, the title had expired. "So this is what?" he asked quietly. "A celebration dinner or an off-boarding meeting?" Lauren flinched, not because the question was unfair, but because it described the tone she had been using since she entered. "Corporate. Clean. Detached. That is exactly what I mean," she said. "You make this emotional when I am trying to be honest." Daniel almost laughed, but the sound never reached his mouth. "It is a marriage, Lauren. It is supposed to be emotional." She leaned forward, hands folded, the same posture she used in investor meetings when she wanted control of the room. "You are a good man. You have always been steady. But steady is not the same as aligned. I have outgrown the life we built here." "The life we built here." He looked toward the hallway leading to the guest bedroom where her company had started, where a folding table had once held 3 monitors, a printer that jammed every other day, and a wall of sticky notes that Daniel replaced whenever the cheap adhesive failed. He looked back at Lauren, and for the first time that night, the pride in his chest turned into something colder. "You mean you have outgrown me?" She did not deny it quickly enough. "I need someone built for the level I am entering." The words sat between them like a signed document. Daniel lowered his eyes to the envelope, then to the untouched plate in front of her. He could have asked if there was someone else. He could have asked whether Bradley Knox, the CEO who had been praising her vision on every call, had helped her arrive at this language. He could have reminded her of every invoice he paid, every contract clause he suggested, every night he believed when no one else did. But some conversations are not meant to save anything. They are meant to show you what has already been lost. He picked up the envelope, felt the clean edge of the paper against his thumb, and placed it back down without opening it. "All right," he said. Lauren blinked. "All right. I will have a lawyer review it." Her expression tightened. She had expected pain, maybe pleading, maybe the old Daniel who would set aside his own hurt to ask what she needed. She did not expect procedure. "You do not have to make this difficult." Daniel looked at the champagne bucket, the melting ice, the bottle they would not open. "No," he said. "I do not." Then he stood, turned off the burner beneath the sauce he had kept warm too long, and walked to the small office down the hall. Behind him, Lauren remained at the table with the biggest contract of her life and a dinner going cold in front of her. She thought the contract had given her a way out. What she did not know was that years earlier, when the company was drowning and she needed Daniel to save it, she had signed papers that would bring his name back into the room the moment success became large enough to matter. 5 years before Lauren walked into their Charlotte dining room in a white suit and placed divorce papers beside a celebration dinner, her company was not a headline, a valuation, or a polished founder story. It was a folding table in the guest bedroom, 3 mismatched monitors, a printer that jammed when humidity rose, and Lauren sitting barefoot on the carpet at 2 in the morning whispering, "What if I am not built for this?" Daniel Mercer remembered those nights more clearly than he remembered most vacations. He remembered the glow of the laptop on her face, the coffee gone cold in chipped mugs, the whiteboard covered in route optimization ideas, carrier problems, customer pain points, and words like visibility, margin, automation, and trust. Lauren had left a comfortable operations job to build logistics software for mid-sized distributors that could not afford enterprise tools, but were tired of losing money to delays and bad data. Everyone told her the idea was too narrow. Daniel did not. He asked what she needed. At first, what she needed was time, so Daniel carried the household. Mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, car payments, health coverage, all of it moved onto his shoulders while Lauren took no salary and told herself sacrifice was temporary. Then what she needed was confidence, so Daniel gave her that too. Sitting on the floor beside her while she rehearsed investor calls, reading proposals he barely understood until he understood them enough to make them better. He was not a software engineer, but he knew how to read people, contracts, and risk. He could hear when a sentence promised too much. He could spot where a client would ask for proof. He could turn Lauren's brilliant but scattered paragraphs into something a tired executive might actually finish reading. When the first office lease came due and the company account could not cover it, Daniel used money he had saved for a kitchen renovation. When her first employee nearly left because payroll was late, Daniel transferred funds from his emergency savings and told Lauren they would rebuild it later. When a regional warehouse group needed a reference before taking her seriously, Daniel called Miles Bennett, an old college friend who worked in distribution consulting, and asked him to take one meeting. That meeting became 3 introductions. Those introductions became the first real pilot customers. Lauren cried the night the first pilot contract came through. She stood in the guest bedroom, surrounded by cardboard boxes, sample reports, and cold pizza, and wrapped her arms around Daniel so tightly he could feel her shaking. "When this works," she said, "everyone will know you were the reason I survived." Daniel believed her, not because he needed public credit, but because he thought gratitude was a memory 2 people protected together. As the company grew, the practical help became more formal because investors demanded clean records. Helen Carter, then only an attorney a friend recommended for startup paperwork, drafted a convertible note for the money Daniel had put in when the company could not stand alone. Lauren signed it at their kitchen table with a tired smile, joking that her husband was officially the nicest lender in North Carolina. There was also language tied to a major contract event, a clause Helen insisted on because Daniel's support had not been casual spending. It had kept the company alive. Daniel barely thought about it after that. In his mind, the paperwork was just a safety rail, not a weapon. He wanted Lauren to succeed so completely that the papers would never need to speak. For a while, success still felt like theirs. Lauren would come home from pitch meetings and collapse against him, talking too fast about objections, pricing, and the way some men in conference rooms looked past her until she proved she was the smartest person there. Daniel would listen, cook late dinners, refill her coffee, and tell her she belonged in every room she was entering. He meant it. He was proud of her in the pure, foolish way people are proud before they realize pride can become a ladder someone uses to climb away from them. Slowly, the story changed. In early interviews, Lauren said, "My husband and I risked everything." Later, it became, "My family supported me." Then, on a podcast recorded 6 months before the Knox deal, Daniel heard her say, "I built this from nothing in a spare bedroom." He paused the audio in his truck and sat there in the parking lot outside his office, feeling the sentence settle. From nothing. He thought about the mortgage payments, the office lease, the payroll transfer, the note in Helen's files, the calls to Miles, the nights he caught her before doubt swallowed her whole. Nothing, apparently, had paid a lot of invoices. Still, he said nothing. He told himself founder stories get simplified. He told himself public language does not always match private truth. But on the night she placed divorce papers beside the dinner he cooked to celebrate her biggest win, Daniel understood that Lauren had not only simplified the story. She had edited him out so thoroughly that she had started believing the edited version herself. Lauren learned to call herself self-made in rooms where Daniel was standing close enough to hear the lie become polished. It did not happen all at once. At first, the praise embarrassed her. The first time a local business magazine called her a rising founder in Charlotte's logistics tech scene, she read the article aloud at the kitchen table and laughed when they described her as relentless. Daniel had kissed the top of her head and said they were not wrong. She had squeezed his hand then, still soft enough to remember the nights when relentless looked like crying over cash flow at 1 a.m. But applause changes the temperature around a person. The first investor dinner led to a founder breakfast. The founder breakfast led to a regional innovation panel. The panel led to podcasts, award luncheons, and conference badges with Lauren Mercer printed in bold letters under the word CEO. Daniel went with her when she asked, wore the navy suit she liked, and stood near the back of rooms while people congratulated her. He was proud, sincerely proud, but he noticed how often her eyes moved past him toward people who could offer larger stages. When someone asked how she had built the company, Lauren used to say, "My husband and I risked everything." Then, after the second funding round, she said, "I had support at home." By the time Bradley Knox entered the picture, she said, "I built the company from nothing because the market needed someone willing to move faster than everyone else." Daniel heard that line at a gala in Raleigh, standing near a tall table with a glass of water in his hand, while Bradley Knox smiled like a man who enjoyed watching ambition detach from its roots. Bradley was polished in the way some executives are polished, all silver hair, measured compliments, and sentences that made opportunity sound like personal destiny. He represented Knox Distribution Group, the kind of national client Lauren had dreamed about since the guest bedroom days. He listened to her with flattering intensity and asked questions that made her feel like the only person in the room who could solve problems at scale. Daniel watched her come alive under that attention. Not romantically, not exactly, but dangerously. She began dressing for meetings before breakfast, taking calls from the patio with her voice low and confident, using phrases like enterprise visibility, strategic alignment, and brand elevation even when they were only talking about dinner plans. The company grew, and Lauren's language changed with it. Their old house in Charlotte became a starter environment. Their quiet weekends became limited bandwidth. Daniel's steady job became stable but not scalable, a phrase she said once on the phone to someone from her leadership team, not realizing Daniel had walked into the hallway. At another event, he heard her tell Bradley, "I have outgrown the life that made me small." She did not say Daniel's name. She did not need to. The sentence pointed to him with both hands. That night, as they drove home, Daniel asked gently, "Did our life make you small?" Lauren stared out the passenger window at the dark highway. "You always take business language personally." "You said life." "I was speaking broadly." He let the answer sit because arguing with someone who had learned to hide contempt inside vocabulary only made the contempt sound sophisticated. From then on, he saw the pattern everywhere. In interviews, She spoke about lonely sacrifice, but not about the man who paid the mortgage so she could take no salary. In investor updates, she praised grit, but not the emergency transfer that covered payroll. At networking dinners, she laughed when people assumed Daniel did something simple and safe while she built the future. She never corrected them with the old sentence, "Everyone will know you were the reason I survived." Maybe she forgot it. Maybe she remembered and chose not to use it because the truth made her success feel less solitary. Daniel kept telling himself success had pressure, pressure changed people, and public stories were never complete. But the woman coming home to him no longer seemed interested in the private version either. She stopped asking his opinion on contracts, though he had once caught mistakes that saved her from bad terms. She stopped sharing fears, because fear did not match the founder image. She stopped saying we when she talked about the company. It was always my team, my growth, my future, my level. And Daniel, who had once been the ground under her feet, began to feel like furniture left behind in a room she was staging for a new buyer. The day Knox Distribution Group announced serious negotiations, Lauren did not run home to celebrate with him. She stayed out late with Bradley and the executive team, then came home glowing with champagne she insisted was only ceremonial. She kissed Daniel's cheek like a habit and said, "You would not believe the rooms I am about to enter." He smiled because some reflexes survive longer than hope. "Then I am glad you are entering them," he said. She looked at him for a second, almost tender, then said, "I know you are." And in that small reply, Daniel heard the entire marriage shift. She no longer saw him as the person who helped open the door. She saw him as someone expected to stand outside it and applaud. The $100 million contract did not arrive like a surprise. It arrived like a storm everyone had watched building for months while pretending the sky was clear. Knox Distribution Group had been testing Lauren's software across 3 regional hubs, and each weekly review pulled her deeper into Bradley Knox's world of private dining rooms, executive briefings, polished board decks, and calls where people spoke in numbers large enough to make ordinary life sound temporary. Daniel watched from the edge of it, proud at first, then quieter as Lauren began treating every step forward like proof that her past had been too small for her. On the morning the contract was signed, she left the house before sunrise in the white suit she had picked up from a boutique downtown, saying she needed to look like someone who belonged in the room. Daniel stood in the kitchen with coffee in his hand and told her she already did. She smiled, but not at him exactly. More at the version of herself his words confirmed. By noon, the announcement hit every local business feed. Knox Distribution Group had entered a $100 million implementation agreement with Lauren's company, a multi-year platform rollout that would transform her startup from promising into powerful. Daniel sent her a message that said, "I am proud of you." No answer came for 47 minutes. Then she replied with a champagne emoji and the words, "Huge day." That was all. He stared at the screen longer than the message deserved, remembering the woman who once called him from parking lots just to say a minor client had agreed to a demo. He told himself she was busy, overwhelmed, buried in celebration. So he planned the dinner anyway, because love sometimes keeps its rituals even after the person receiving them has stopped understanding their cost. That afternoon, while Daniel left work early to buy steak, rosemary, and the non-alcoholic champagne Lauren liked, his phone rang with a call from Miles Bennett. Miles had been the first real connector who helped Lauren's company get taken seriously in distribution circles. He did not waste time with small talk. "Daniel, I heard the Knox announcement. Congratulations, but I need to ask you something." Daniel paused near the grocery store entrance. "What is wrong?" Miles lowered his voice. "Are you still protected on the old note?" Daniel looked out at the parking lot, where afternoon sun flashed across windshields. "The convertible note?" "Yes. And the major contract language Helen drafted." "I think so." "What?" Miles exhaled. "Because I heard Lauren's team is telling Knox there are no outside individual claims or legacy obligations tied to this contract event. That may be true if the documents were amended, but if they were not, someone is writing history too clean." Daniel felt the first cold edge of warning. Lauren never mentioned an amendment. "Then call Helen." Daniel did not call immediately. That was his mistake, or maybe his last act of trust. He stood in the store holding a package of rosemary, trying to reconcile 2 versions of the same day. The public victory that made him proud, and the private possibility that Lauren had already begun cutting him out of the legal story the same way she had cut him out of the founder story. When he got home, he opened the old file cabinet in the small office and found the folder Helen Carter had labeled Mercer Logie Systems' initial support documents. The name of Lauren's company had changed twice since then, but the papers were still there. Convertible note, funding acknowledgement, email confirmations, a clause triggered by a major contract event over a defined threshold. Daniel read slowly, not as a businessman looking for leverage, but as a husband trying to understand why his hands had started to shake. The clause did not give him control of Lauren's company. It did not let him destroy what she had built, but it did give him rights. Notice rights, financial interest, disclosure obligations, a claim if certain company events created the kind of value his money had helped preserve when no one else would invest. He closed the folder and sat back in the chair. The guest bedroom door was open across the hall. He could almost see the old folding table, the pizza boxes, Lauren crying into her hands because payroll was due and she had no idea how to face her first employee. He could see himself saying, "We will figure it out," and meaning every word. Around 6:30, while he was seasoning the steak, Lauren's voice drifted from the hallway outside the garage. She had come home, but she had not entered the kitchen yet. She was on the phone, voice bright and low. "Bradley, after this, I can finally clean up my personal life. No more dragging old weight into new rooms." Daniel stood still, rosemary between his fingers. Bradley said something Daniel could not hear. Lauren laughed softly. "I know. I should have done it months ago." The words did not hit like a scream. They hit like a door locking. Daniel turned off the burner, wiped his hands, and went back to the office. He opened the folder again, scanned the documents into a secure file, and forwarded them to himself. Then he called Helen Carter. She answered on the third ring. "Daniel, it has been a long time." He looked toward the dining room, where he had already set 2 plates. "I think Lauren is about to pretend I was never part of the company." Helen was quiet for one beat. "Then send me everything tonight." By the time Lauren walked in wearing the white suit and carrying the divorce envelope, Daniel had already sent the first file. That was why he did not shout when she said she had outgrown him. That was why he did not beg when she described her next level. He was not calm because he felt nothing. He was calm because the contract she thought had freed her had also awakened the paperwork she had forgotten, and for the first time in years, Daniel was ready to let the original story speak. Helen Carter's office sat on the 4th floor of a brick building in uptown Charlotte, above a coffee shop and a small accounting firm, the kind of place Lauren would have called too modest for the rooms she was entering now. Daniel arrived the morning after the dinner with the white envelope in his briefcase and the old company folder under his arm. He had slept less than 2 hours, not because he was raging, but because memory had become louder than rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lauren in that white suit, placing divorce papers beside the plate he had set for her, speaking about alignment as if 7 years of marriage and 5 years of sacrifice were a brand partnership that no longer fit. Helen met him in a conference room with frosted glass walls and a long table already cleared for documents. She was in her early 50s, sharp-eyed, composed, and practical in a way that made panic feel unnecessary. Years earlier, she had drafted the first paperwork when Daniel's emergency support for Lauren's company needed to become something cleaner than a husband covering gaps from personal savings. Back then, Lauren had joked through tired tears that Helen made love look like paperwork. Helen had answered, "No, I make risk honest." Daniel remembered that now as he placed everything on the table. The convertible note, the funding acknowledgement, the email where Lauren wrote, "You are the reason this company is alive." The wire records for payroll, the lease payment for the first office, the draft proposals with Daniel's edits, the message from Miles Bennett warning that Lauren's team might be telling Knox Distribution Group there were no legacy obligations tied to the contract. Helen read without rushing. Daniel watched her turn each page, her expression controlled, her pen moving in small notes along a legal pad. The silence in the room was different from the silence at home. At home, silence had meant Lauren withholding truth. Here, silence meant someone was putting the truth in order. After nearly 20 minutes, Helen looked up. "The major contract clause is still here." Daniel leaned forward. "Does it matter?" "It matters enough that it should have been disclosed." She tapped the page with her pen. "This does not give you control of her company. It does not let you stop operations. but it creates a legitimate financial interest triggered by a qualifying contract event, and $100 million is not a gray area. Daniel exhaled slowly. He had not realized he was holding his breath. I do not want to destroy what she built. Helen studied him for a second. Daniel, let us be accurate. You do not want to destroy what both of you kept alive. The correction was gentle, but it struck harder than accusation. For years, Daniel had trained himself to say Lauren built it. Lauren earned it. Lauren deserved it. All of those things were partly true, which made the missing part easier to ignore. She had worked hard. She had endured rejection. She had carried pressure no one else could carry for her. But Daniel had carried pressure too. He had carried the mortgage, the payroll gaps, the emotional collapses, the legal risk, the introductions, the late-night revisions, and the belief she used when her own ran out. Helen turned to another document. There is also the email chain where she confirms that your support would be recognized in any major liquidity event or enterprise contract above a certain threshold. Her company may have changed names, but unless this obligation was superseded, it did not vanish because the branding improved. Daniel looked toward the window, where sunlight hit the glass of a nearby office tower. She filed for divorce the same day the contract was announced. I saw the envelope. She told me she needed someone built for her new level. Helen's mouth tightened slightly. That sounds like someone who expected you to be too hurt to read old documents. Daniel looked back at the table. Maybe I would have been, if Miles had not called. Helen nodded. Then Miles did you a favor. She gathered the papers into 3 stacks: marriage, company, and contract. Here is what happens next. We send a notice preserving your rights under the note and major contract clause. We request disclosure of any representations made to Knox Distribution Group regarding legacy obligations. We notify her counsel that the divorce and the contract event cannot be treated as unrelated if she is attempting to exclude your documented interest. We do not threaten. We do not exaggerate. We let the paperwork be louder than the insult. Daniel almost smiled at that, because it sounded like something he had been waiting to hear without knowing it. She will say I am trying to ruin her. She may, Helen said. But claiming what she signed is not ruin. It is history refusing to be edited. That sentence stayed in the room long after she said it. History refusing to be edited. Daniel thought about the dinner table, the cold steak, the unopened bottle, the white envelope beside his plate. Lauren had not only asked to leave. She had asked him to accept the version of their life where he had been useful in the struggle but unnecessary in the victory. Helen began drafting the notice while Daniel sat beside her, answering questions about dates, amounts, introductions, and the early payroll transfer he still remembered down to the dollar because it had emptied the emergency fund they had built together. At the end, Helen printed a summary and slid it toward him. This is not revenge, Daniel. Revenge would be trying to burn her company down because she hurt you. This is preventing her from using the company's success to erase the person who helped keep it alive. He read the first line of the notice, then the second, then stopped because his throat tightened in a way he did not want Helen to see. She looked away politely. For the first time since Lauren placed that envelope on the table, Daniel felt something steadier than heartbreak. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just ground. He had not imagined his role. He had not invented his sacrifice. He had not been small because Lauren learned to describe him that way. When he left Helen's office, the Charlotte afternoon was bright and ordinary, traffic moving along the avenue, people carrying coffee, phones, briefcases, lives that had not changed overnight. Daniel walked to his car with the old folder in one hand and the divorce papers in the other. Lauren thought she had off-boarded him from her future. She did not know that by signing the biggest contract of her life, she had opened the door for every page she once signed in the smallest years of her company to walk back in. Lauren spent the next morning behaving as if the divorce papers had been a difficult but necessary business decision, something unpleasant that could be moved through with efficiency if Daniel refused to make it emotional. She took calls from the patio before sunrise, her voice crisp through the glass doors as she discussed rollout timelines, media language, board expectations, and the phrase strategic next chapter more times than Daniel could count. He sat at the kitchen table with coffee he had not touched, watching the untouched champagne bottle still sweating slightly in the silver bucket from the night before. The steak had gone into the trash before midnight. The white envelope had gone into his briefcase. The old company documents had gone to Helen Carter. Lauren came inside at 7:45, phone still in hand, wearing a camel coat over a black dress, the polished version of herself already rebuilt for the day. "I have a full schedule," she said, as if he had asked. "There is a press coordination meeting, then a call with Bradley's team. Then I am meeting my attorney at 4. Daniel looked up. "All right." She paused near the island, clearly bothered by how little resistance she was getting. "I meant what I said last night. I do not want this to become ugly." "Then do not make it dishonest." Her expression tightened. "That is unfair." "Is it?" Lauren set her phone down carefully, the way she placed objects when she wanted to look controlled instead of angry. "I am trying to treat you with respect." Daniel looked at the dining table where, less than 12 hours earlier, she had placed divorce papers beside a meal he made to celebrate her. "You are treating me like a legacy vendor whose contract you are terminating." The phrase landed. He saw it in her face. For a moment, she was not a CEO, not a founder, not the woman Bradley Knox had praised in boardrooms. She was his wife, hearing herself named accurately. Then the corporate mask returned. "That is exactly the kind of language that proves my point. You are resentful. You do not understand the pressure of what is happening now." Daniel stood slowly and carried his cup to the sink. "I understood it well enough when pressure meant payroll was due and the account was empty." Lauren's eyes flashed. "Do not start rewriting the past." He turned from the sink. "I was about to say the same thing." She gave a short laugh, defensive and sharp. "Daniel, you helped. I have never denied that. You denied it on a podcast. That was branding. You denied it at the gala. That was positioning. You denied it when you told Bradley you had outgrown the life that made you small." The room went quiet. Lauren looked toward the patio doors, then back at him. "You heard that?" "Yes." "Then you heard something out of context." Daniel nodded once, slowly, as if he had expected the answer and was tired before it arrived. "That seems to be the only place I still exist for you." "Out of context." Lauren picked up her phone again, not to use it, but to have something in her hand. "This is why we should let attorneys handle the details. I am willing to be fair, but I will not be guilted into staying in a marriage that no longer aligns with my life." There it was again. Aligns. The word sounded expensive, bloodless, clean enough to hide what it cut. Daniel walked to the small office and returned with a plain folder, not the old company file. Not yet, just a copy of the divorce envelope and a note with Helen's contact information. He placed it on the island. "Then your attorney can speak with mine." Lauren stared at it. "You already hired someone?" "I called someone who knew our history." "Our marriage history?" "The company history." Her eyes narrowed. Why would company history matter in a divorce? Daniel did not answer immediately. He did not want to give her a fight in the kitchen. Helen had warned him not to win the whole marriage in one conversation. Let the notice speak. Let the documents speak. Let Lauren discover that dismissing him as the wrong partner for her next level did not erase the papers she signed when the first level was still collapsing under her feet. "Because you made the company the reason I no longer belong in your life," he said. "So I think it is fair for the company to remember when I did." Lauren's face changed, just slightly, but enough. Not fear yet. Recognition. Somewhere beneath the press calls, the white suit, the founder language, she remembered the convertible note. She remembered Helen at the kitchen table. She remembered signing tired documents between coffee cups and payroll panic, joking that Daniel was the nicest lender in North Carolina because back then the idea of him ever needing protection from her seemed impossible. "Daniel," she said, softer now, "do not do anything reckless." He almost smiled. "I am not the one who filed for divorce before checking the paperwork." Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since the contract announcement, she had no polished answer. A notification lit up her phone. Bradley Knox. She looked at the screen but did not pick it up. Daniel saw that too. The rooms she wanted to enter were already calling. The man she wanted to leave behind was standing in the kitchen, no longer asking to be included, no longer begging her to remember, no longer willing to let her brand herself as self-made while treating his years of sacrifice like outdated furniture. "I have to go," Lauren said finally. "Then go." The simplicity of his answer unsettled her more than anger would have. She took her coat from the chair, gathered her laptop bag, and walked toward the garage. At the doorway, she turned back. "I hope you do not turn this into something that hurts both of us." Daniel looked at the folder on the island. "You already did that. I am just making sure it hurts honestly." The door closed behind her. Daniel stood alone in the kitchen, sunlight spreading across the table where the celebration had died. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed with a message from Helen. Notice will go out today to Lauren's counsel, company leadership, and Knox Distribution Group regarding preservation of rights and disclosure obligations. Daniel read it twice. The house was quiet. For years, quiet had meant support, patience, and faith. Now it meant something else. It meant the paperwork was about to speak in rooms where Lauren had forgotten his name. Daniel spent the morning reviewing the details Helen had sent him. The folder on the counter a silent reminder of how much control he still held in the quiet aftermath of last night's revelations. The house felt emptier without Lauren bustling about, and each room echoed the absence of conversations that had once been background noise, reminding him that he was navigating a new reality on his own terms. He walked through the living room, stopping by the window to watch the sunlight hit the driveway where Lauren's car had left an hour ago, the tires still leaving faint impressions in the wet asphalt. The contrast of her polished departure and the stillness inside reminded him how quickly life could shift when priorities and loyalties changed overnight. His phone buzzed with a message from Helen confirming the notice dispatch, and Daniel felt a small sense of satisfaction that the legal and corporate processes were moving in alignment with his expectations, each step reinforcing the structure he had quietly been building while Lauren focused on the next big contract, unaware of the subtle maneuvering happening behind the scenes. He poured himself a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and carried it to the kitchen table, placing the cup down gently while opening his laptop to review emails from stakeholders and compliance teams, ensuring that every I is dotted and T crossed, understanding that the perception of order and meticulousness would serve as his strength in this transitional period. Mid-morning calls began with financial advisors seeking clarification on cash flow and asset allocations, and Daniel answered calmly, strategically, knowing that patience and composure were just as important as the hard numbers in securing his position and protecting his future. The conversation touched on the nuances of shared distributions, contract clauses, and contingencies that could impact Lauren's ability to maneuver in the company without his knowledge or oversight. Daniel kept his tone neutral, giving no hint of personal triumph or lingering resentment, only the precision and clarity of a man aware of his rights and responsibilities. Between calls, he walked through the office area, glancing at old photographs of board meetings and company milestones, a reminder of how much he had contributed to the foundation of the enterprise, and how much Lauren had taken for granted in her pursuit of rapid advancement. At noon, Daniel prepared a quick lunch, eating while reviewing Helen's notes on upcoming legal disclosures and potential points of negotiation, mentally mapping out scenarios where Lauren's ambitions could intersect with obligations she had yet to fully comprehend. He paused occasionally, thinking back to the dinner table confrontation, the tension in her eyes when he referenced the convertible note and company history, and he allowed himself a small, private acknowledgement that he had delivered a quiet but precise reminder of the foundation on which everything had been built. As afternoon approached, Daniel stood by the patio doors, watching the trees sway gently, reflecting on the idea that control was not about retribution, but clarity, preparation, and timing. The subtle power of foresight and adherence to process was more effective than any visible gesture of victory, and he understood that the best outcomes often came from restraint and observation rather than impulsive action. He returned to his desk, reviewed the communications schedule for the next days, and noted points where strategic influence could be exercised indirectly through compliance, reporting, and stakeholder updates, realizing that the new chapter required patience as much as resolve, and that quiet confidence often spoke louder than any immediate confrontation. Daniel knew that every choice, every email, every document sent or held, would shape the path ahead, guiding the unfolding events with precision and calm, leaving the final effect on Lauren's perception and the company's trajectory to the measured pace of well-planned action. Lauren learned about Helen Carter's notice 12 minutes before the press coordination meeting was supposed to begin. She was standing in a glass conference room at her company's Charlotte office, surrounded by her head of operations, 2 board observers, a public relations consultant, and Bradley Knox on speakerphone from Atlanta, when her general counsel walked in with a printed packet and a face that drained the celebration out of the room. The announcement draft was already on the screen behind her. Strategic partnership, national rollout, transformative platform, $100 million implementation agreement. Lauren had spent the morning polishing every phrase so the business world would see her exactly the way she wanted to be seen. Decisive, visionary, self-made. Then her counsel placed Helen's letter on the table and said, "We need to pause external communication." Lauren almost laughed because the sentence sounded impossible. Pause. We announce in 40 minutes. Bradley's voice came through the speaker, suddenly sharper. What is the issue? Her counsel turned the first page toward her. A preservation of rights notice from Daniel Mercer's attorney. It references a convertible note, funding acknowledgments, a major contract trigger, and potential disclosure omissions related to legacy obligations. The room became so quiet Lauren could hear the air conditioner above the ceiling tiles. She looked at the page, saw Daniel's name printed where she had worked so hard to remove it from the story, and felt the first real crack move through the perfect image of the day. That is old paperwork, she said. It was personal support during the early stage. Her counsel did not soften. It was documented as investment support. There are signed acknowledgments. Bradley cut in before anyone else could speak. Were these obligations disclosed during diligence? Lauren looked toward the screen, then at the people around the table. Every face had shifted from celebration to risk assessment. This was the world she had wanted to enter, the world of large contracts and serious rooms. And in that world, a forgotten husband did not sound like emotional baggage. He sounded like undisclosed liability. "Daniel is angry because I filed for divorce," she said. "This is personal." Her counsel turned another page. The documents are not personal in format. They are corporate records. Helen Carter attached email chains, transfer records, and the clause tied to a qualifying major contract. Lauren's hands went cold. On the top sheet, one highlighted sentence from years earlier stared back at her in her own words. "You are the reason this company is alive." She remembered typing it at 2:30 in the morning after Daniel emptied their emergency fund to cover payroll. She remembered the relief. She remembered meaning it. What she did not remember was the exact moment she decided that truth no longer fit the founder she wanted to become. Bradley's voice returned, slower now. "Until this is clarified, Knox will not approve the press release." The public relations consultant closed her laptop halfway. The operations head looked down at the table. The board observer who had praised Lauren's leadership an hour earlier asked whether investor communications needed to be revised. Lauren felt the room moving away from admiration and toward containment. "He cannot do this," she said, but her voice had lost its CEO edge. Her counsel answered carefully. "He can ask that his rights be preserved. And if the major contract triggers the clause, we need to address it before anyone signs final rollout schedules or public representations." By 3 that afternoon, Lauren was sitting across from Helen Carter in a neutral conference room. With her counsel beside her, Bradley Knox appearing through video, and Daniel seated at the far end of the table in a dark jacket, calm enough to make her angry. Helen laid the documents down one by one. The transfer that covered first payroll, the lease payment for the first office, the old proposal with Daniel's tracked edits, the email to Miles Bennett that led to the first distribution pilot, the convertible note, the major contract clause, the message Lauren had sent after signing it, joking that Daniel was officially the nicest lender in North Carolina. Nobody in the room laughed. Lauren tried once to say, "That was between husband and wife." Helen looked at her and replied, "When you used his money, his credit, his labor, and his signed documents to keep the company alive, it became part of the company record." Bradley said nothing, but his expression told Lauren enough. He no longer saw only the brilliant founder in the white suit. He saw a reputational risk who had tried to sell a clean origin story while leaving the original pages in someone else's drawer. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "I am not here to take credit for your work. You did work hard. I never denied that." Lauren looked at him then, and for a second the room disappeared. "Then why are you doing this?" Daniel's eyes did not move from hers. "Because you denied that I kept the ground under you while you learned how to stand." The sentence landed harder than any financial claim could have. Lauren looked down at the highlighted email, at her own gratitude preserved in ink, and understood that the contract she thought would prove she had outgrown Daniel had instead summoned every piece of evidence that she had not risen alone. Lauren left the conference room with the kind of silence that follows a public correction no one can politely undo. The press announcement was postponed. Bradley Knox's team requested a revised disclosure schedule, and her own board observers asked for a complete review of early-stage obligations before any rollout celebration moved forward. Nothing had been canceled. Nothing had been destroyed. That almost made it worse. If Daniel had tried to burn everything down, Lauren could have called him bitter, vindictive, unable to handle her success. But he had done something colder. He had made the room read the original version of the story. Outside the office building, the Charlotte afternoon was bright and sharp, sunlight reflecting off the glass towers as if the city itself had no patience for embarrassment. Lauren caught up to Daniel near the curb where Helen Carter was speaking quietly with another attorney. "Daniel," she said, and for the first time in years, his name did not sound like something she had already outgrown. He turned, calm, folder tucked under one arm. "Your counsel should speak with Helen. Please do not do that right now." Her voice broke on the word please, and it startled both of them. She looked back toward the building, where people who had praised her only yesterday were now reviewing her past like a risk file. "You are going to ruin everything I built." Daniel studied her face, and the sadness in his eyes was deeper than anger would have been. "No, I am only putting back the pages you tore out." Lauren shook her head. "I worked for this. You know I worked for this. I never denied that." His voice stayed low. "You worked hard. You fought for the company. You carried pressure I could not carry for you. But you were the one who turned my help into nothing because nothing sounded better for the brand." She looked down, unable to meet the full weight of that sentence. "I was under pressure. Bradley, the board, the investors, everyone wanted a clean story. And I became the mess. That is not what I meant. It is what you said in every room where I was no longer useful to mention." The traffic moved behind them, ordinary and indifferent. Lauren remembered the guest bedroom, the printer, the payroll panic, Daniel sitting beside her with a spreadsheet while she cried into her hands. She remembered telling him everyone would know. Now everyone did know, but not because she had honored him, because he had been forced to prove he existed. "Can we fix this?" she asked. Daniel glanced toward the folder in his hand. "The contract issue will be fixed. The company will move forward if the paperwork is handled honestly. I am not trying to destroy it." Her eyes filled. "And us?" He looked at her for a long moment. "You filed for divorce on the day you thought success made me disposable." She pressed her lips together. "I was wrong." "Yes," he said softly. "But the problem is not that you were wrong. The problem is that being wrong required a legal notice for you to see me." Lauren had no answer. The woman who could command boardrooms, charm investors, and explain complex technology in plain English could not find one sentence strong enough to erase a cold steak, a white envelope, and the years she had edited from her own rise. Daniel stepped back. "I will take what the documents say is mine, not more. I will not damage the company for the sake of pain. But I will not stand beside you while you call my foundation your empty ground." She wiped her cheek quickly, embarrassed by tears and daylight. "So this is how it ends." Daniel looked toward the street, then back at her. "No, it ended at the dinner table. This is just the first honest meeting we have had since." Then he walked away with Helen, leaving Lauren outside the building she had entered as a celebrated founder and exited as a woman whose legend had been corrected by receipts. The $100 million contract still existed, but it no longer meant what she wanted it to mean. It was not proof she had risen beyond Daniel. It was proof that the success she used to discard him had been built, in part, by the man she tried to remove from the story. What do you think hurt Lauren more, the legal claim itself, or the fact that everyone finally saw Daniel's role in the life she claimed she built alone? Share your thoughts, because stories like this remind us that ambition is powerful, but gratitude is what keeps success from becoming betrayal. If you believe quiet strength, dignity, and hard truth deserve to be heard, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the next story.